to look at the poem Antarctica by Derek Mahon in this video. So another really interesting Mahon poem, which is typical of his style. It's inspired by real historical events. He takes a narrative approach. He looks at the life of a historical figure, but tries to look at it from a slightly different perspective. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the poem, remember the reason you have the space beside the poem is to make notes as we go along. And I want you just to think about something to do with the style of writing. Mahon is an immensely gifted, careful, skillful craftsman in terms of the way he manages and manipulates language. And one of the examples of that is the structure of this poem. This poem, you'll see it in the notes. It's what's called a villanelle. You'll see that term there, villanelle. Now that means that the poem follows kind of very strict rules, much as you might be familiar with like what a sonnet is. Sonnet has the rules of how it should be written. And this is a villanelle has 3 5-line stanzas, or tercets. 5 3-line stanzas, or tercets, apologies. And then has a 4-line final stanza, or quatrain. So it's 19 lines long, and then it follows a particular meter or beat. I'm going to do other separate videos on meter and rhythm as the year goes on. But just the fact that he's able to write this really wonderful, interesting, thought-provoking poem within the restrictions of such a very, very, very particular poetic style is testament to and evidence of Mahon's skill as a writer. Okay, so let's have a talk. The man in the picture is called Lawrence Oates, and Lawrence Oates was a member of the famous Scott expedition to the South Pole, which resulted in disaster and the death of the members of the expedition in 1912. Could be right, it's in your notes. And the reason that Oates is known to history is because of the way he died. So very briefly, he developed frostbite while making his way back with his colleagues from their attempt to be the first people to find the South Pole. Famously, they were beaten there by Amundsen's Norwegian expedition. But he contracted frostbite, and the frostbite turned into gangrene. So he knew that he had very little chance of living. But he also knew that because he couldn't move quickly enough, he was slowing down his colleagues. So he went out into the storm and died. Now, he's famous because he was mocked by later people who viewed the events because of what were reported as his last words in the diary of one of his colleagues. And the diaries were found after the disaster. And in the diaries, he was recorded as having said, "I am just going outside and maybe some time." Now, this was seen as indicative of a person who, because of their conditioning, because they were part of the British Empire, stiff upper lip, never express emotion culture, even at the moment where he was going to die, he wasn't able to express himself. He was crippled by his conditioning. So all he could say was, "I'm going outside, chaps, and I may be some time." So like Bruce Ismay in After the Titanic, Lawrence Oates was a figure of ridicule, a figure who was judged harshly by other people and by later generations. And in this poem, Mahon says, well, maybe we need to look at it again. And again, we get this new perspective. Mahon challenging us all the time to think about our prejudices and the way we view other people. So the poem is built around a refrain. And the refrain in the poem, and the line you're going to learn And if you know this line, there's a couple of very, very important images in this poem, but this is a great poem. It's great to prepare because it's easy. It's also very interesting. Is the idea at the heart of the ridiculous, the sublime. And if you can just get a grip of that oxymoron, of that, strange juxtaposition, well, then you have the poem. So it means this, that Lawrence Oates his last words are ridiculous. Like it is laughable that he wasn't able, he was so crippled by his emotional conditioning, his cultural conditioning, that he wasn't able to, express himself. And those last words, I'm just going outside maybe sometime, are ridiculous. But at the same time, Lawrence Oates stands for something sublime. And sublime means perfect, valuable, of almost, created by God, flawless. And what Mahon's referring to there is the fact that Oates gave up his life to try and save his friends. That there's something immensely admirable, there's something hugely impressive about that sacrifice. And that's why Mahon chooses to write about this poem, to write about this man, because he's using him as a metaphor for an insight into human nature. We're all flawed. We're all at times ridiculous. But at other times, we are capable of the sublime. We are capable of sacrifice. We are capable of being selfless. We are capable of heroism. So this poem is inspired by the story of Lawrence Oates, and on a superficial level, it's about Lawrence Oates, but it's not. The whole poem has a figurative meaning, and it offers us deep, quite philosophical insights into human nature. It's an easy one to do. I am just going outside, and maybe some time. The others nod, pretending not to know. At the heart of the ridiculous, the sublime. He leaves them reading and begins to climb, goading his ghost into the howling snow. He is just going outside, and maybe some time. I love the alliteration of goading and ghost. I love that image of him already a ghost before he dies because he knows death is inevitable. I love the fact that he's goading himself, which means forcing himself, which means it's difficult and he's struggling, but he's willing to do this to try to protect his friends. I love the onomatopoeia of howling because it brings the world, the setting of the poem to life. It makes that Antarctic hellhole so vivid. It's an example, again, of Mahon's economy over language, is just the ability to pick the right adjective and add it to the noun, and you have this wonderful evocative writing. The tent recedes behind its crust of rime, and frostbite is replaced by vertigo. Mahon is imagining the last moments of Lawrence Oates as he looks back, and he can hardly see the tent because it's covered in ice and it's melting into the vast whiteness of the landscape. He imagines those last seconds where the pain of his frostbite is replaced by a dizziness, a vertigo. And then he hits us with the irony of that line, at the heart of the ridiculous, the sublime. This guy died in a way which was noble and selfless. Yeah, he's ridiculous, but isn't there something sublime he challenges us to think of? And he asks the question, and it's a rhetorical question, in the third last stanza. Need we consider it some sort of crime, this numb self-sacrifice of the weakest? Very, very clever. Of course, he knows the answer. No, he says, no, we shouldn't regard that as a crime. We should admire Oates because of what he did and because of what he represents. Because he represents us and the nobility and the selfless sacrifice that we're capable of. In fact, forever. Love, solitary enzyme. Though the night yield no glimmer, there will glow at the heart of the ridiculous, the sublime. The imagery is really interesting. First of all, him as a solitary enzyme, like that image of this black dot isolated in a frozen world just about to die. But then, of course, an enzyme is part of a chain. So this idea of him being part of all of us, that we're all connected. And then the darkness, the night yields no glimmer, so life can be really tough. But then if we look, we will see glowing our capacity, yes, for human failure, but also for heroism. And it gives Mahon hope. He takes leave of this earthly pantomime, quietly knowing it is time to go. I am just going outside and maybe some time. At the heart of the ridiculous, the sublime. The refrain is so powerful. The juxtaposition of ridiculous and sublime. The repetition, emphasizing, that line, making us, forcing us, just through that stressed repetition, to think about what it means. The thoughtful, quite detached emotional tone, but the vivid quality of the writing and the description, bringing home Mahon's observation without ever preaching at us. He's doing what he wants to do, which is asking us to think about this story from a slightly different perspective. It's a tremendously interesting poem, tremendously thought-provoking, beautifully crafted in the Villanelle format.